This is the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast, helping you work together better with Judy Rees, X-Ray listener, best-selling author, international virtual collaboration trainer, and master of metaphor. Hear more at xraylistening.com.
Hello and welcome to the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast. With me today I've got Peter Wright, who's someone I've known online for ages and ages, and we chat about lots of things. But Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Peter Wright. Although I'm retired, I look after my dad, but mainly my activity away from home is that I work in sports performance. I coach cricket in schools with children of varying ages, and also at our club. And I also coach the local rugby team. So I've that's the bit that keeps me sane, if you like. Because I'm working with people of considerably much younger age than I am, and it keeps me on my toes, and it keeps me sane, really.
Mm-hmm. And of course, that's what captured my attention when I was thinking who would be interesting to talk to on the Collaboration Dynamics podcast, because you have because of your position with all those sports teams, you have a unique point of view on collaboration. So for you, when collaboration is at its best, that's like what?
The feeling, the image that comes up really first is that I'm rather like the conductor of an orchestra, and there are many instruments within the orchestra, and they've all have their own music, they all have their own lines, if you like. But we've also got to merge them into I feel like a fusion of performance that has meaning for both themselves and for the listener. So that's really how in a sense my role is. It's about the way I want them to play, but it's about allowing them to express themselves at the same time.
And so you're like the conductor of an orchestra, and they're like a fusion of performance.
Yeah, you could say that's it. It's a rather sort of unique kind of scenario, mm-hmm. But it involves all the individuals, as well as, if you like, the collective expression of all those individuals as well.
So is there anything else about the individuals?
In terms of the individuals, their role is about also playing at their best. Mm-hmm. Because when they're not at their best, it affects, if you like, the overall sound of the performance, or the overall expression of the performance, and also it's about affecting the others within the orchestra, within the team as well.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of orchestra is that orchestra when they're playing at their best?
It's a happy orchestra. It's an orchestra that is enjoying playing as for themselves, for the people around them, and also for the audience. It's that kind of sort of a flowing expression of how they want this whole performance to come across.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of flowing is that? Flowing expression?
It varies with the sport. Let's say for rugby, for instance, the flow of the way the team plays is all right. It's not essentially about where the ball is, but it's also about how the players are flowing into the right positions relative to the ball and relative to what their teammates are doing.
Mm-hmm. And that's so in rugby that it's like that. What about in cricket?
In cricket, it's there's the performance of the fielding team, which has to ebb and flow, within where the batsman has struck the ball, and also it's for the batsman, it's about what's happening relative to you, the partner at the other end. It's little teams within a bigger performance. So everything is about small teams within the overall team, small teams, mid-range teams, big teams, and it's the whole dynamic of it is a fascination, really.
And so it's about the individuals and about the collective expression, that fusion of performance and that flowing expression. Is there anything else about the fusion of performance?
If they're not switched on to each other, then they're acting in isolation. They're playing in isolation. Mm-hmm. And, that is okay for certain, particularly in rugby, for certain positions. But it doesn't work if you've got, even in, let's say, a small team where individuals are playing out their performance, their game, but nobody's with them. They'll soon, if a player takes the ball into contact on his own with no teammates there to, if you like, secure the ball and recycle it for the next phase of play, then the ball is lost and suddenly the team who's attacking is in defence. Mm-hmm. And so you really have to. There has to be an awareness of both the person who's carrying the ball and also the people around him, as to how they're going to move into the next phase of play after the one they're in at the moment.
So they need to be the individuals need to be switched on to the people around them. What kind of switched on is that? It's switched on in the sense of, if you like, taking in all the sensual information that tells them where they need to be next, but also they need to be switched off in terms of their ego. Mm-hmm. Because, as we know in sport, the more the ego comes into play, if you like, the less the performance functions well. And although you could say, yes, if somebody's doing something individually brilliant, they're only able to do their brilliance if their own ego is out of the way. Because we know in sport that if we get in our own way, then the performance sort of crashes very quickly. And anybody who ever talks about about the performance they've done today, or at any time, if you want to play at your best, in actual fact, we need to get out of our own way. So if anybody is, that's the thing that needs to switch off in any performance, whether it's an individual or an individual in a team context. So brilliance is down to, the expression in the moment. Rather than somebody saying, well, I'm going to do this all on my own. Because the minute they start thinking that, then their own performance goes as well. Sorry. So part of me wants to get back to that orchestra metaphor, and part of me is just really, really curious about how the switch on and the switch off works. So they need to switch on to the people around them and switch off their ego. What kind of... well, I suppose the first question is that switch on and the switch off, are they the same kind of switch?
I would say the first answer, I would say intuitively be no. They're not the same kind of switch. Because why have I said that? It's a good question. I think at the start of a game, at the start of a game, we're all in everyone is in a particular state, particular frame of mind, a particular state, and the team needs to be switched on prior to that,
Mm-hmm.
so that they actually go into the game already in a situation where they are switched on. And how people switch on before a game, that's as basic an individual as if you like the 15 players in a rugby team, or the players in a cricket team, or any team, or even any individual. How we switch on. I mean, it's easy if you're a let's say a singles tennis player, you can have your own strategies and techniques for being able to switch on the moment the contest begins. But if I'm working in a sort of a team situation, if everybody isn't able to manage how they switch themselves on, let's say in a team of 15 rugby players, you've got 3 who can switch themselves on, and 12 who can't, who are relying upon the people around them or me, then they're not going to be ready at the start of a game.
Mm-hmm. And
So
that switch on you've just talked about, is that still switching on to the people around them, or is it? Have I misunderstood?
it's switching on to the people around them,
Mm-hmm.
and away from their own ego.
So both processes happen before the game starts.
They have to, otherwise you're not in the contest until that starts.
Mm.
You're playing, but you're not functioning that well.
Mm. So both processes happen before the game starts, and they're different kinds of switch. The switch on and the switch off.
I would say so, yes.
Is there anything else
Because
about
that? How I look at performance is that if there's a lot going on pre-match, and we all have everybody has thoughts and everything swirling around inside their heads, conditions, feelings within the body, let's say pre-match nerves, all that kind of thing. How quickly they can move from that into a position whereby that isn't the important thing. That may still be going on, but the important thing is that they get into a state whereby they are able to focus their attention in a directed kind of way, as opposed to, if you like, at the mercy of the circumstances around them.
Mm-hmm.
So the match preparation is really about becoming aware of everyone else around you, but also switching into a state of being able to pay attention to what doesn't require too much thought.
Mm. And what's the relationship between that process and collaboration?
It's interesting, this thing about focus, because when we have an open focus, we're taking data in from a wide bandwidth, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
If we have narrow focus, we're taking our data in from a narrow bandwidth. And for us to be aware of the other players, we need to open out that bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we've got no idea. We may be running with the ball and have no idea about who's on our left, who's on our right, who's behind us, what's coming in front of us. We're just, narrowly focused on that, on that I'm running with the ball. Once the focus is opened out, then our awareness of everyone around us becomes much more part of our sensual experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the sensual experience that, if you like, it's rather like it's like on a continuous loop. Once you step onto that, then it's easy to keep that moving. It's, the pre-match has to be, well, let's open the focus. And then we gain an awareness of everyone around us. If we don't open the focus, we never will.
So
we may as well be in a changing room with 15 booths, and we don't know, or we're blinkered and we don't know who else is there.
So opening that focus is part of that switch, or is that switch?
Yeah, I'd say it was part of, and a fairly big part of. Once, because the byproduct of opening our focus actually facilitates the switching off the ego.
So opening our focus facilitates switching off the ego and opens up the bandwidth, so we're taking more information in.
Yeah. So in a way, you could say that the switches are, they might seem to be two different switches. This is why I paused when we were talking about the switches before. But now it's clear that, yes, they're two different switches. But if you like, there's one overarching switch which deals with both of them. One bringing it on, and at the same time, the other one gets turned down. Or they're like variable switches rather than on-off switches.
Right. So variable switches, and there's the overarching switch, and as you open the focus, the overarching switch, then one gets turned up and one gets turned down, and they're variable switches rather than on-off switches.
Yeah, I'd say variable because, it's rather like when we can either dive into a cold water swimming pool, or we can ease ourselves into it. And I think that how we do it individually is a matter of our own choice, which works best. But I think as a collective, I think probably the easing into it, hence the variable nature of the switches.
And there's so much to ask you about now. When all of that happens before the game starts, that opening of focus and that overarching switch and the switching on to the other players and switching off to the ego, and you are like the conductor of the orchestra, is there anything else about you when all of that's happening?
There is, because I've got the baton in my hand. And how I'm playing within this dynamic is equally important to, if you like, the finished performance, the way it sounds, the way it comes across. What I'm doing is equally important as how I'm directing the players.
So what are you doing with your baton?
Well, for a conductor, he has to beat time. That's his, if you like, that's part of his focal point for the players. In a 70-piece orchestra, if you aren't keeping good time, then the players who need your cue, they're confused. They then try and start picking up the cues from other places if you're not much good at it. So, I've never ever. I'm not a student of music, although I'm a self-taught player. But I've never studied it formally. But I suspect that part of a conductor's role starts with keeping good time. And I know that as far as I'm concerned, how I am being for the rest of the players is it's an importance to them, so that that my role functions better, and that therefore, if I'm keeping good time every time they look at me, if I'm in an agitated state, should we say, as nervous as they are about this particular game, let's say, then they'll pick up on that, and I won't be helping them. I'll be keeping bad time as opposed to keeping good time.
So if you're in an agitated state, that will affect them. What's happening with your switches?
It's interesting because I've developed this use of, let's say, using a clipboard to make notes, particularly in the first half of a match. the clipboard is rather like a switch. It takes me out of the if you like, the emotion of what is going on the field, and my being drawn into that. It keeps me at arm's length in terms of of taking notes about what's going well in the game, what needs to be improved on, what the opposition are doing. So it keeps my focus in a good place instead of an emotional place where anything could happen. Sometimes does. If I have the clipboard there, I'm switched into a slightly more, if you like, broader role of data gathering. So I'm opening my senses, if you like, in terms of data gathering, in order for me to be in a good switched on place, as opposed to switched into something that is not going to help anyone.
So just having the clipboard switches you into that data gathering, open focus place.
Yes, it's that simple. It keeps me on task, if you like. The clipboard is almost like the baton in my hand.
So when the clipboard is almost like the baton in your hand, and you mostly use the clipboard in the first half of the game, what happens in the second half?
By then, there's nothing else that I can bring in terms of, if you like, controlling the players on the field. If you like, the performance is going then intuitively. We've got over all the sort of, if you like, the getting the vehicle started, all the pitfalls that will take place in pre-match and first half and half time. What I say in half time is related to the clipboard. How I'm saying it to the players is related to the clipboard. They then, they're almost flying solo in the second half. And which is essentially, everything's geared to how to reflect on the first half and how to reflect best on the first half to bring out the second half performance. Because, everything else, they're in the middle of the performance, although there's a poor timeout. That's my role in the second half is much more, if you like, just keeping an eye on certain individuals who may be ebbing and flowing in terms of their focus, rather than where in the first half I'm looking at much more how the whole team the whole orchestra's playing. And I'd not really ever looked at it that way before, but thank you. That's actually revealed something as well.
That's one of the interesting things about doing these interviews. You usually learn something too.
Oh, indeed.
So thank you very much for sharing all of that. That's absolutely fascinating for me. It's a subject that I know very little about, and I just love hearing about it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So if people are interested in what you've been saying on this interview and would like to find out more about you, how can they get in touch?
They can get in touch by email or through my website, which is my website is pjwhypno, all one word, .co.uk, and my email is peter@pjwhypno.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter on various guises. I'm Peter Wright on Facebook, and I'm Guru Pete on Twitter.
And you've got to share why you're Guru Pete. You've written loads of books, haven't you?
Yeah, well, that's right. And they're all books on if you like, self-development, performance, that kind of genre, that kind of domain. And the guru came from, well, it's spelt in the French way, if the French ever spelled guru, Gourous, because it came from people I've coached rather than from anything. I thought, oh, this would be nice, because they say, oh yeah, Pete, you're my guru. And I'm thinking, actually, we all have our gurus, and I'm clearly their guru. So I thought, oh well, I'll just take it one stage further. There are no other guru Pete's in in that sort of, if you like, online named context.
Wonderful. I think that's really beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely talking to you. I hope other people find it exciting.
Likewise, Judy. Many, many thanks, and speak to you soon.
Yes. And after we finished recording, Peter was telling me that the reason he originally started doing the whole clipboard thing was to stop himself from ranting at the referees. Somehow the holding the clipboard changed his emotional state such that he was able to be a little bit more dispassionate and not get annoyed by the referees, which of course doesn't benefit anybody when it comes to coaching kids sport. So it's really working for him. And of course he hadn't realised some of the implications in terms of the switches and how those switches worked. And once again, starting from a metaphor, from that's like what, has provoked an interesting conversation. Yes, of course, we drifted quite a long way from the original metaphor of the orchestra, and yet it was still there. That metaphor was like a thread through the interview, or, if you like the conductor's baton, beating time gently, almost invisibly, as we talked, and still very much there, still very much a part of the interview as it played. If you want to know more about metaphor and how metaphor can work in collaboration, do please have a look at xraylistening.com, and if you have any questions, any queries, or if there's anybody that you would like to hear featured on the Collaboration Dynamics podcast, please drop me a line. You can find a contact form on the website.